Hey everyone and welcome back. I'm Trixks and today I'm finally making another Disney by Alphabet artwork. Been a fairly long time since I painted my Figaro piece, so I think we're well overdue the letter G. I'm diving back into Disney's older animated classics here, so only a handful of you guys might actually be familiar with the character I'll be illustrating today. But trust me when I tell you he's a little creature worth getting to know. Back when Disney decided to experiment with the tone of their animated films, The Black Cauldron was released in 1985 and was a much darker and grittier take on a fantasy tale. But while it might have freaked some young children out, I loved it. And out of this movie, the little apple-loving Gurgi captured my heart. When you give his design a second look, you got to admit he kind of looks like the furry animal version of Geppetto from Pinocchio. Come on, tell me you don't see the resemblance. I dare you. Back-to-back Disney animals, I know, but I couldn't help myself. I was deciding my list of Disney characters right after a Disney Classics binge, and Gurgi was fresh in my mind for the letter G because, well, the people that have seen The Black Cauldron will know why. Anywho, let's move on to talking about the illustration itself. I knew right away I wanted to pay homage to one of Gurgi's iconic moments in the movie, and his
Munchings and Crunchings in here somewhere
line was screaming at me to add an apple into his piece. With that idea in mind, I thought portraying him as a shy little animal slowly reaching out for the apple would be a strong visual concept. It's like an alternative situation to the one we watch as our first introduction to Gurgi. He's still all about that sweet, juicy red apple, but he's looking up and begging you to let him have it instead of just swiping it. As usual, I wanted to be considerate of the composition of my artwork, so in this one, I really wanted to add depth to the shrub Gurgi peeks out of. In my hunting for references, I was inspired by a few photos I saw of big cats prowling through foliage while staring down the camera head on. Long wisps of grass or branches tend to frame them in the picture and obscure parts of their body, and I just loved the idea of emphasizing the forest environment in that way with Gurgi. But by tilting the camera down and lifting it a bit, I could make Gurgi appear more submissive and vulnerable to the viewer than a direct eye-to-eye like some of the references were. Once I had my sketch laid down, I knew I wanted to experiment with my textures and brushstrokes in this piece. I've been loving the paint and pastel look these days, so with that in mind, I started to build up the environment. I was putting a bit more effort into it than I might have in the past considering my previous aversion to drawing and painting backgrounds and landscapes. My week of landscape studies for my June study jam helped thaw me out to them a bit more, so I'm not gritting my teeth at the idea of creating them so much anymore. Though I still draw the line at urban environments, I have yet to properly experiment with that genre at this time. I love the textures I ended up with in the background and foliage, especially how well the borrow turned out. References pay off, people, trust me. After I laid down the flat colors for Gurgi and his apple, I did a light shadow layer to help define his form a little where the light would struggle to reach in his form, like his palm, forehead, and inner ear, for example. It's a bit different to my ambient occlusion defined shadow method I've used in most of my digital paintings in the past. I'm always open to experimenting with my use of lighting to see what kind of different results I can create, and this was certainly an experimental piece. Experiment that paid off in my opinion. With the defining shadow layer done, I knew I wanted Gurgi to be lit in a very dynamic way, so that meant a fair bit of dark shadow that I carved away to set him into the dark spot near his burrow, before I shined a light cascading down through the branches and over him. I officially love this beam of light look. I've used it in my digital art twice in a row now, and I have zero regrets, because they both work so well. With the beam of light cast, I now had a direction to guide where I would put the highlights over Gurgi and his environment. Then I also included a subtle layer of environmental reflected light to paint the tips of his outstretched fingers red from the apple and his mouth green from the grass below him. Just little touches here and there to further ground him into the environment. I never would have thought I'd be so proud of how I painted an apple, but damn, that thing looks so good. You can see why he wants it. Further in, I wanted to make sure the depth of field was pushed in a more interesting way. I remember seeing some cool dynamic uses of blur to emulate cool camera zooms, fast moving characters and objects. So in this case, instead of using the standard Gaussian blur to lose focus on the foreground elements, I wanted to experiment with the zoom radial blur applied to the foliage to add a bit more direction to the piece that draws your eye into the center. Almost like someone zoomed into Gurgi's personal space to interrupt him mid-reach. And then with a little tilt blur added to the background and a bit of color adjustment to the piece to warm up the green and yellow tones, Gurgi was all done and looking so sweet and gorgeous. Thanks for watching everyone. If you liked this video, be sure to tap that like button, share it, or leave a comment below. If you have a couple coins to spare, please consider pledging to my Patreon, which directly funds my channel and art projects in exchange for a range of exclusive rewards. Every little bit helps, and anything is greatly appreciated. Until next time, see ya!